Hi, I'm Lori.
And I'm Kevin, and this is No Longer Ashamed.
We are survivors of childhood sexual abuse.
And we're here to share with you that if you're a survivor, you don't have to be alone.
Our logo is a salamander, and the reason is a fire salamander can survive a fire, and you have survived a fire.
We want to help you with your journey to healing and hope.
We are all survivors together, and we walk this journey together, and you are not alone.
By telling our stories, we are hoping that you will have the courage to share your stories as well and find your voice.
Because stories are so important, and for so long I know that I wouldn't tell my story, but when I finally shared my story, that's when I got my freedom.
And this is our journey and your journey to healing and hope. So come with us.
We are having a panel today, and we are so excited to have some of our guests back. Let's start with our first ever guest, Mike Chapman. Welcome.
Hi, everyone. Good to be back. Yeah.
Why don't you update us a little?
How long has it been? I'm still a certified coach with Husband Material and working as well with my own Puller Life Consulting, and have my own podcast, of course, Healing for Male Survivors with Mike Chapman on all platforms, and have interviewed both Daniel, who's here as well as Kevin. And it's been great. I have over 5,000 downloads and 75 episodes, and yay! And got my training from Lori, so it's all her fault. But I thoroughly enjoy doing it, absolutely. And also, I'm on a speakers bureau for trafficking survivors, and where I'm sharing my story and working with several different groups in the anti-trafficking realm. And actually, I'm going to be sharing my story this fall at the International Human Trafficking and Social Justice Conference, which is an annual conference, international, but happens at University of Toledo, but it's all on Zoom. It's all web-based. And I'll be sharing my story, specifically focusing on the trafficking aspects of it and why so little resources are being devoted to male survivors of trafficking, and being a voice for that, because there's not a lot of voices out there. And suddenly I'm the expert. So yeah. And being present and being a voice and letting them know, yeah, you are overlooking this huge population. And when they do look at boys, they think, oh, it's just like teenage runaways, maybe they're gay, and so they end up in prostitution or whatever. And that is a portion of that, and they need services as well. There's this huge plethora of boys, young males who are being exploited that are not in that demographic, that are just falling through the cracks.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for your work, Mike. And we did get to witness your little stint on TV. That was really exciting for us to see you.
Yes, I got interviewed at a local Charlotte, North Carolina station. It was on Human Trafficking Awareness Month, which is in January. And they interviewed, actually, it was several of us from that Speakers Bureau who they interviewed, along with the Safe House Project as well, which is human trafficking, anti-human trafficking advocacy group, interviewing members from both of us for that whole day where they focused on this topic. So
that was awesome. So cool.
Yeah.
Well, Daniel, welcome back. It's been a minute, and literally
a week.
A week.
Yeah.
So not a lot of catching up, but when we talked to you last week and found out all the amazing things that you're doing to make a difference and have an impact, it just touched our heart, because as Mike was saying, there's just not that many resources, and it's a way for us to, touching one person makes a difference. If we can touch more, that's great, but just seeing the impact that you're having as a father and in the work that you do. So thank you so much. Anything else you want to add to that before we get going?
No, I think that's good.
So if you aren't familiar with Daniel, go listen to last week's episode and get caught up. Kevin, always good to have you here. And why don't you talk about what the panel is about today?
Well, I was really wanting to look at what the effects of, or what it's like to report to the police. And I never did, so I can't attest to what you go through, but I've heard so many stories of, and, when we talked to the Dodorian Law Group, and they talked quite a bit about what happens to survivors when they have to report to the police, and then if they have to testify if it goes to trial. And so I just thought it'd be really important for anyone listening, if they're considering going to police, what that entails. And since we have guests that have done that, I thought it'd be good to review that and just, life experiences of having done that.
I don't know if you knew that I did that, Kevin.
Yes, I do.
Yeah, later
Yes,
later
I do.
in life, and had small community, had to go to somebody I knew. I'd been to, celebrations, birthdays with, and of course they couldn't do anything, statute of limitation.
Yeah.
Right.
And
That's a big issue.
Yeah. And I remember, it was before internet really. And people always say, doing the right thing feels so good. And I remember getting in the car and saying to my friend, that sure didn't feel.
No.
That felt like doggy poo poo. And, and that always stuck with me. I was glad that I did it. I didn't like doing it. I didn't like feeling like now that person in my community knew something about me. He was the police chief, but I am glad that I did it. And then listening to the DeLorean group saying that even though they can't do anything if they're on record, then if somebody new comes up, it's fodder for the files. So let's start with you, Daniel.
Well, so I actually did not go to law enforcement. I had a very close friend of mine who went to law enforcement. Actually, she was in the foster care system. We were very close in high school. She knew my story. I had told her some things. She had met the last abuser and gone on drives with us and everything. She herself was a victim of childhood sexual abuse through the family, so incest, and she was in foster care system as a result. So she went to, I believe she reported it either to her foster mother or directly to Children's Services. So I was in 10th grade. And I was called out of one of my classes one afternoon down to the office. And I went into the office and the secretary ushered me into a back room. And when the door opened, I had no idea what this was about. I was 15, no clue at all what it was about. Walked into the room, and the room was full of children's services workers, detectives, and they had a tape recorder, and they were very kind in their demeanor. But I would say today, looking back on everything, although they tried to do it in the right way, there were some things that were done and how they approached the whole interview that really were damaging to me. And these were professionals, mind you. This wasn't their first walk in the park when it comes to stuff like this, but the magnitude of the case was overwhelming to them because I was just one of his victims, and they had never seen anything like the extent that he had gone through to abuse boys in my small community and in an adjacent town. So they were a bit over their heads in that regard. So I walk into the room, complete strangers. I, at this point, don't even understand that I've gone through abuse. I thought I was an accomplice with people that I loved and doing secret things. And at that point in my life, of course, the abuse had stopped because I had came to faith in Christ at 14, and I feel like God gave me the inner strength to tell the last abuser, no, we're not doing this anymore. Even though I still maintained a relationship with him, and he would still come pick me up, take me places, whatever. And I knew that there was always that tension between us, that he always wanted something more from me. I felt like I was being a good missionary, trying to win him to Christ. Totally bizarre now when you think back at it, but I didn't know. I didn't understand. I was young, and I didn't have a frame of reference for what happened as abuse. So here are these people, these adult men that I don't know anything about. They know a lot of stuff. And they are asking me all kinds of very invasive personal questions, and they're recording it all on cassette tape back then. I see the cassette tape. I remember watching the reels on the cassette tape rolling as I spoke or as I answered questions. And the feeling that I got at the time, you're right, Lori, it did not feel good at all. And I felt like I wish that I could just sink into the floor, because that's how I felt inside, like I was sinking. And all I could think of during that time, all these questions like, Did he take pictures of you? How many pictures did he take of you? Where, did he do this? Where did these events occur? And here I am trying to remember. It had occurred so often and so much, I couldn't remember everything. And then you felt bad that you couldn't remember. And then you feel bad because you're like every question and every answer I felt was a nail in his coffin. And this is a person I loved. And I just remember the trauma of that and just being completely blindsided by it. Again, they were unfailingly kind and gentle and soft, but the questions are necessary questions, I will add. But the questions are not kind and soft. You can't make a question that deeply personal and invasive soft, no matter what your demeanor is. And so it was another type of rape to me, to be honest with you. It's probably pretty strong to say it that way, but that's how I felt. And I remember trying to be truthful because I wanted to be truthful, but then I felt like it was my fault. So I felt like I was blaming him for everything. And mind you, this was just the last abuser. This is not even questions about anybody else who had abused me. So I remember telling them something to the effect of, yes, but I don't know if I used the words I wanted it or it wasn't all his fault, but I was posturing myself in that way and they could kind of tell I was. And so they were kind of bringing the questions back around to him and what happened. And I remember at the end, one of the men there who worked with Children's Services he was a pastor in a neighboring town of a church. And he could tell that I was really struggling. And I kept telling them things like, well, I don't do those things anymore. Because I was deeply embarrassed. I don't do those things anymore. I'm a Christian now. I kept saying this. Okay, this is in my mind. I'm a Christian, so I don't do these things. And he saw me struggling. So he takes me aside afterwards and he said, I'm going to give you exactly the scripture that he used and tell you that its impact on me, which was, the Bible says to confess your faults one to another and to pray for one another that you may be healed. I think it's in the book of James. I knew the scripture, and I've always wondered, I've always thought of after that, especially as an adult, when I started to understand it was abuse, how he was trying to be helpful, but he misapplied a scripture that was complete, not even taught. I was younger than 15 when these things happened, and I was a victim of abuse, but he's basically saying I had faults to confess. He meant it as an encouragement, don't be embarrassed. If you feel like you did something wrong, confess it. But the context was completely misapplied to me, right? I was an individual without power in a situation where an adult had power over me. So they weren't my faults to confess. They were the abuser's faults to confess. And so he meant the scripture well, but that just kind of further cemented in my heart and in my mind that I had done these things, and that deepened the shame that I felt. It didn't encourage me. It wasn't like, oh, I did something good and biblical today. So it was like, yeah, you were pretty rotten, weren't you? Mm-hmm. And it re-victimized me in that way. So, and as a short follow-up, law enforcement went to my house the very same afternoon, the detective, and I came home from school. I was traumatized from what had happened because I went back to class after this, okay? I went back to class, got out of school, rode the bus home, walked home from the bus stop. When I walk in the door, who is sitting in my living room talking to my mother? The detective, right? And telling her everything that had happened. And it was necessary that he did that, I want you to know, because I sure wasn't going to tell my mother. But my mother's reaction to that whole thing after he walked out the door was so devastating to me. She literally exploded at me over what had happened. Now, never mind that she didn't put two and two together. She knew I was spending a lot of time with this person. She knew this person was giving me money sometimes. She knew all this, and not being from a generation where you just put things together, that fell back on me. And my mother's anger was not at me for what happened. It was at the fact that Children's Services was involved and she had missed everything. And now she was afraid they were going to take me away from her. Okay, this is her fear. And that fear came out as anger. But what did that do to me? That solidified again, even deeper, the fact that I had been wrong and I had done shameful things that jeopardized my relationship with my family. And it made the whole thing worse in my mind. So not only did I not come into this whole interview situation understanding that I was abused, I didn't leave the whole interview situation understanding that I was abused either. And I did not understand that I was abused through the conversation with my mother. So it would be decades before I finally understood I was a victim of abuse and I could start processing what happened. So I want to just defend law enforcement and say it's a tough job. They have to ask the hard questions. They have to delve in. They have to violate your privacy, quote unquote, in order to seek justice. But sometimes the way that they do it can leave the victim feeling even worse and more like they're responsible for what happened. I don't recall that there was ever any an assurance from many of them that this was not your fault. I don't think anybody said that to me once. This is not your fault. He had no right to do this, right? There was no perspective given to me. They recommended therapy for me. And I guess maybe that's where they thought I should get that kind of, whatever. But even just an initial word during that process would have helped me, I think. But that's my experience with it. It's totally negative. Not a positive thing at all to say about it, other than the fact that they did catch him. And on the strength of my recorded testimony, they were able to get a subpoena and search his house. And they cuffed him to the couch while they searched. And they came across an untold treasure trove of information that convicted him at trial that went way beyond me. So it was necessary, but it was very, very traumatic.
And that had to be hard too, because this was a person that you cared about.
Yes, it was. You better believe it. I felt horrible the whole time. This stuff was in the papers and he was going through trial. Mercifully, they did not ask me to testify. They had my recorded testimony. They might have if they felt like they needed it, but they had so much other information. They found, I don't know, countless photographs of nude young men and youth and journal entries where he detailed things. And I often wonder now, I've often wondered, what's my picture in there? Because I know he took pictures of me, right? What was I mentioned in his journal? But they found enough information to convict him without me having to go to court. And for that, I really thank God that I was spared from that kind of an ordeal. But there are abuse survivors where the abuser, they don't have that much information on them, and they do require them to come in and testify. I was spared that, but I remember through that whole process, Lori, more to your point, yes, I felt horrible throughout the whole time. And knowing that he was convicted and sent to jail, I felt like I was responsible for him going to jail over something we shared together, because that's the only way I could frame what had happened, because he groomed me.
Yeah.
Right.
Laura Richards, crime analyst, she always says, teenagers don't have consent. Children don't have consent. When they say basically that they were like a teenage prostitute, no, they don't have consent. They're being trafficked. And, I think we just need to hear this over and over. And your story is so impactful. And I want to get to back to some more layers of it after we hear Mike's story. But what was coming up for me was I was an adult about 30 when I went to the police, and I went willingly. Sure. And I can't imagine had I been your age and basically sabotaged and you didn't have any preference. Nobody kind of said, hey, this isn't right. You're young. This shouldn't be happening. And so, even though you didn't go in on your own accord, you were really brave to be able to be like, oh my gosh, now I've got to, answer these questions. You could have not, you could have been protective, but because you were so willing, and then we find out there's so many more victims.
Well, yeah, and I blame my friend, my very good friend. Like, I had words with her after school that day before I got home. I'm like, what did you do? And I was so mad because I'm like, she betrayed my trust, but she didn't. And as an aside to that, before you get into Mike's story, I don't know, it's within the last few years, I contacted her and I said, thank you so much for what you did. You saved so many other children. I couldn't understand the extent of what he was doing. I mean, he had showed me other pictures, right? But I was 13, 14, 12 when this started with him. And so I didn't have a frame of reference for, he shouldn't be doing this, right? I only know what was happening to me. And, this happens to other boys too. And so she saved so many more people by being brave and telling the story for me, because I would never have done it.
Yeah. I think one thing that really strikes me about your story is how children don't realize that they don't have consent, that they don't even realize that they aren't in control of the situation. You felt like you were in control. You were part of the relationship, but you didn't realize you weren't in control and you weren't to blame. And It terrifies me that they came to your school and took you out of class
Out
to
of
do this
class.
interview in class
Right.
in front of all these other kids that knew you.
Probably in uniform.
Yeah.
So it's like,
It's
what did
just,
he do?
yeah.
Yeah.
They came to the school. Well, mercifully, they didn't come into the classroom. They called me down to
Okay.
the office over
Yeah.
the speaker.
But I
But yeah,
mean,
they came to the school. Somebody saw them coming in. Teacher saw them.
Mm-hmm.
The secretary knew. The principal knew. And now
Mm.
I had to go to school there every day knowing the principal knows. And I remember being told by one of them, "Don't worry about Principal Honeycutt. He knows how to, keep things on the down low." And he does. He was a professional, right? But still, the whole thought is I'm going to school now every day. The people in the office know that children's services and the police were there and they know something's afoot. And yeah,
I mean,
it's like going to school every day, you're re-traumatized.
they could have handled that
Mm.
so differently in order to protect you, but they
And
didn't.
maybe a policeman listening will hear this and recognize. And I know there's more training now and that, but yeah, that boy being blindsided. Well, there's a few things I want to get back to with your story, but I'd like to give Mike his opportunity to share how that happened for you.
Yeah, yeah. My story's more similar to Lori's than Daniel's. That it wasn't until really in the last 6 years that I started reporting to the police about what happened as a child. And of course, there no evidence. I think it's open statute of limitations. It all happened in Oregon. So, and I think they have a 5-year window after you realize the extent of injury, which is very, very vague. So it could fit, but there was no real evidence. So they had nothing really to go on. Though I did report I grew up in Portland, so it was all Portland police. I believe I contacted them. And then I tried to make contact with I think the county sheriff that had the campground that I know I was taken to. That would have been one of the venues, and didn't get very far with them. I had a hard time finding a person. Portland did take a report, and I told him where he was living now, and because he's still alive, and that they would just put it on file. So in case they got other reports, it would just help document it, but they just did it over the phone. The other thing I did do is get a hold, because I know when I was experiencing the trafficking, I'm pretty sure it was documented. So what they now called CSAM, child sexual exploitation or child sexual abuse materials, which otherwise known as child pornography, was produced at these events. And I was told, yeah, you can contact the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, let them know, and they will interview you, getting the facts of your case, photos of you at that age when the abuse happened, and then computer matching if they are able to find anything in their database, faces, bodies, whatever, that they can find a match. They can let me know, and it helps them prosecute it because then there's a name to go with the photo. They have an identity, and it helps to prosecute those more and more power to take them down and so forth. So did a full interview. They contacted local law enforcement where I live in North Carolina, had someone from maybe state police. I don't even remember what agency it was, but I think it was state police. Someone met me. I think we just met in a church parking lot that was empty, and I brought them the photos and so forth, and basically just handing out the information. All the other stuff was over the phone, but they wanted to actually hold on to the documents and so forth. So, or the photos. So I gave him the copy of the photos, and he took all that and then processed them. And then I think I finally followed up about a year later, and there was no hits. So, of course, all my abuse was in the 70s before anything was digitized. And so, yeah, unless it happened to be digitized or got found in some kind of raid or whatever, it wouldn't necessarily make the database. So, but the fact I did go through that. Now, for the abuse when I was 20, if you remember my story from episode 10, that I was sexually assaulted by a Methodist minister when I was in college, and did inform about 2 years after the fact his church leadership, and then ended up interviewing him with my then new pastor who helped set it all up and so forth. I got a hold of him recently. I think he's actually in the Seattle area near you guys. And yeah, he says he always regrets not telling law enforcement, that we should have gotten law enforcement involved. And I didn't want to at the time. Now looking back, probably should have, because the church did virtually nothing. They gave him a wrist slap. I then noticed they brought him back in a part-time basis. He was near retirement age, so we're just going to tell the church to, keep him away from children until he retires. And then he was retiring soon anyway. But then after he retired a few years, they brought him back in part-time status, continuing to serve the church. It's like, but then in 2019, contacted them again and reopened it. Okay, this is what's happening and so forth. So they re-interviewed me. They got the old files, and they said that after I had disclosed, because mine was in the 80s when it happened, someone from another state, he had bounced around state to state, as a lot of these institutions do. They will, instead of kicking him out, they'll just move him around. Mm-hmm. Same with the Scouts, Catholic Church. It's how they deal with them. Instead of getting them out, we'll just move them around. Like it's going to stop the behavior. I don't know why they think that. But anyway, so someone from another state in the 70s, after my report, reported their issue, similar story. And then a third person in another other state, their abuse happened in the 60s. So 3 different decades, 3 different states, same person. And then they kind of disclosed there was also like the local church board brought up something, and they kind of have explained it, and then they took it back. Like something else happened, and they realized, I shouldn't be telling you this. And so they kind of backed up and didn't finish their thought. But apparently the local church body had other issues with him, possibly of a similar nature, but then they ended up not disclosing that to me. But part of the interview, and this is similar to Daniel's experience, where it became worse than the original trauma that I interviewed. I happened to disclose the fact that, I had been abused by my father, and that I had repressed memories of that, because all that was fresh going on in 2019. That's when all this stuff was coming fresh. I did not mention trafficking. Glad I didn't. But when they interviewed me for all this, the interviewing guy, very sweet, took all my information, very helpful. Then they turned it to their accountants and the lawyers. And then they used the fact that I had been abused by my father, that I was somehow damaged goods. They didn't use that language. It's my language. But because any kind of benefit I would get from any therapy they would end up paying for would also help me with the trauma I experienced from my father. So therefore, they should be less responsible for paying for it. So because I was damaged goods, okay, they would be less financially responsible for the therapy, which, their reimbursement, cockamamie reimbursement program, that my therapist would have to share copious notes of the therapeutic process, a huge violation of privacy, and then it would have to go through all the different hands within the church leadership before they would do a reimbursement. So it'd be like several months before they would then pay the therapist. And I said, no, thank you. And so, I have all the documentation. I think I actually have it right here of everything that I've saved from everything, including all of our documentation back and forth. And when I went to the local paper in small town Oregon, explaining my story, they shared my story, published my story. And what happened, that they contacted the Methodist Church and they refused to cooperate. And I said, the whole reason I wanted to do this was to stop it from happening to others. That was my whole goal. Oh, we understand that. Absolutely. Yes. Agree. And then I actually tell someone about it. So hopefully it can make a change. And they clammed up. They said, we're familiar with the name. Yes, we spoke to him. When I have transcripts basically of all of the conversations we had, dates and everything, would not confirm anything that was the truth, just that they had conversations. That's all they would say. So so the bean counters and the lawyers got involved, and that ended up being worse than the original trauma, at least from that guy.
And it's like we say, the victims are re-victimized.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I interview survivors, you guys interview survivors, and the horror stories continue. So many different versions of the same thing where they're re-traumatized if they disclose. And I think, yeah, my good pastor was right that we should have informed law enforcement early on in that process.
Mm-hmm.
Because institutions, their goal is to protect the institution, even when it's churches.
Yeah, not children. Not children.
They're right, not victims, not children. So, and so much happens with adults too. So much sexual abuse happens with adults too. They don't look at the victims. Jesus would,
Mm-hmm.
but no, they are there to protect their institution.
Yeah.
Their bottom line.
Yeah, and it's sad, but yeah. So involve law enforcement because you go to the institution, you are coming against them, and they are going to circle the wagons against you. Yes, you are the enemy.
So
you become
Mike,
the enemy.
I want to delve more into that, but I also am really curious about the first part of your story when you had to submit photos.
Yes.
What I'm curious about, because Kevin and I have talked about this a little bit, what if all the perpetrators are dead? So some people, they realize later in life, is it still worth someone's while to do that?
If it is on the interwebs and the dark web and all that stuff, if they have a name attached, and there's more and more laws out there now being passed even recently, giving you the right to take it down. So you can say, take it down. It is the internet and it's out there and it can be copied and put other places. But so you can say, that is me. It needs to be taken down. And so you can have it removed. And but basically that the famous blank hub site is actually going bankrupt because there's been so many US laws enforcing them. Okay, they need to make sure everyone in the photos has to have proof of age. If you don't have it, you got to take it down because of new laws in place that you have to have permission from signed permission. Yes, this is okay. I'm making this. I want it posted. Fine. If you don't have it, it has to come down.
Okay.
So they're basically 95% of their content has to be taken down because they don't have all that.
So my other question is, will you say more, because I'm running into this all the time with radio interviews as well as Interrupted, the change from child pornography to the initials that you said. Will you tell us why what the difference is and why that's so important for us to use that language?
Yes, that it's now child sexual abuse materials, and it defines more of what that is instead of the term child pornography. And I've talked about this on my own podcast as well, that child pornography somehow to me implies consent. As if the children are signing up and agreeing to do this, making this. And like we said, children can't consent to these things. They are often, very often, being trafficked to producers of these materials. And so they're documenting the child sexual abuse and then taking that documented materials and selling it for profit. So it's, I make the joke, I have a little dark humor. It's not like a little 5-year-old smoking a cigarette. Okay, Otto, I'm ready for my close-up. Hey, let's change that light over here. Okay, I'm ready for our next take. No, they're like sedated, if they're awake at all, or like zombified sedation where they're quasi-awake enough so they have some physiological responses. But they're being abused. It's not consent at all. And I think saying it as CSAM instead of child pornography helps explain what it is, that it's materials generated from child sexual abuse.
Yeah, and the language, even Nathan, who we've talked with, Spiteri, talks about the language that we use. And then also in Daniel's story, even though I love how you framed, Daniel, that they were trying to do the best they could, but there is like no way for that to be in any way beneficial to the child. Yes, they got him off the streets and that's fabulous, but also it's horrendous. And I think that's why this is so important, because whether we make the decision to go or it's put upon us, we're not walking out, jumping, clicking our heels, like the I quit smoking commercials in the old days.
Exactly right.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, once in a while, you will read of a survivor story that they're very jubilant that the abuser was caught, but those are usually people that have actually processed in some way what happened to them. But yeah, I mean, my stories not that way at all. I couldn't have processed it at my age, and it sounds like what Mike was saying earlier. Through his interviews, he's discovering a lot of problems with the whole process of reporting that people are experiencing. It's very, very re-traumatizing. And maybe it is collateral for collateral damage that has to happen. I mean, there's no way to talk about what happened to you without in some way, even if you're in a good place in life, which I feel like I am, there's days that I can talk about things very easily. And then there's times that if I make a particularly vulnerable blog post, it'll wreck me for days. So it's, you're in a catch-22. Definitely to keep children safe, it's important that law enforcement gets involved because they will very often pursue things where religious institutions, like Mike is saying, would not if it happens within the religious context. Mine didn't, but Mike's did. So law enforcement will pursue. And sometimes, and not just when child abuse matters, just in sexual abuse matters, sometimes law enforcement can be the pit bull that won't let go. And they can do a lot of devastation as well as help. Abuse is a messy, messy, messy thing. And survivors don't come out of it unscathed at all. And even when law enforcement gets involved and they're supposed to help, and they often do, survivors don't come out of that process unscathed. They just don't.
Yeah. Mike.
Yeah, I wanted to mention another issue is especially with smaller communities, but also bigger communities. I follow a podcast, The Ugly Truth About the Girl Next Door. Great story about an individual, problems with being trafficked, family controlled, but there's a whole community aspect as well. And she could tell the police, but the police officer, it's like all the leaders within the police, it's all interconnected to this whole powerful group that's doing all this trafficking. And yeah, there's no way to get honest cooperation from the police if they are also part of it, And yeah, you don't know necessarily who to trust.
Yeah, in fact, her story as a teacher got it out of her finally and went to her parents.
And the parents were the traffickers, yeah.
So as adults, and Kevin has said this so many times, where's the outrage? As adults, it is our responsibility. And if it's going to put us in a bad light, if it's going to expose us for things we've been through, we're adults. Children are helpless, and a lot of times they don't even know they're being abused because they're being groomed, and they're being then groomed to be the next perpetrators. And so the stopping is so important. Not that all people who are abused become perpetrators. We're very clear on that. But when a child is so abused that then become adult, they don't know the difference. There's a lot of deprogramming that will have to happen. And I'm so grateful to both of you for sharing your story and the work that you do, because we have a long way to go. And I remember when the Bill Cosby situation came out, and there was one woman who would not go to court, and people were really talking bad about her because they needed her statement. But she said, this is going to blow up my life. And there's enough of you to do the thing. And what we saw is, even though there was enough of them, what happened? Injustice still happened. So I think that there is that. And I think that that's what we're saying is, we're not going to be unscathed. But we also have resources. We have coaches, counselors, support groups, and taking advantage of those and being in community and supporting each other as we walk through this, I think is what is something that's really important, because just having the support, someone holding your hand as you're walking through it. I remember, Mike, I saw the look on your face when you said, here I am going to the police, and now I've got this new thing I've just remembered, because isn't that the nature of abuse? We learn to, we learn to cover it. And then when it starts coming out, oh my goodness. And that if you had said, you said you had been abused by your dad. So now, it's insanity.
Right.
Yeah, it's really hard to put it in a good light, but I think I mean, it's a difficult process to go to the law enforcement, and it's hard to make it easier. I am very thankful when we interviewed the Dodorian Law Group, how they talk about how much they try to protect the survivor and how much change they've been working on in order to protect the survivors through this process, and that work is being done. But I think it's important to emphasize the reason to go to law enforcement and why that does matter. And I think one of the main reasons that came up during the Dodorian Law Group is even if the statute of limitations is over, one of the hardest things to prosecute perpetrators is having actual evidence. If it's a hearsay thing, then having evidence is really difficult to prove because often survivors don't report to law enforcement until years later, and they realize, as we all have encountered, that I survived abuse. Oftentimes survivors don't recognize that until they're adults, until they encounter something that makes them realize, oh, that happened to me.
Even the grooming, like sometimes we don't have words for that until we're adults and we're like, wait a minute.
Or until we do an episode about grooming and I realize I've been groomed. But I think it's important to emphasize that one of the things that works for prosecutors is corroboration. And even if you report it and the statute of limitations or, there's not enough corroboration in your case to prosecute someone, if you report it and it's on file and then someone else reports it and they have corroboration now, they have someone who's completely unrelated who reports it, and then they can use that evidence and prosecute. And it's so important to prosecute these perpetrators. So few of them, there's such a tiny percentage of perpetrators that ever go to trial, that ever get prosecuted. And they know that. They know that they're going to get away with it generally. They know the chances are very slim that even if they get caught, that they're going to get prosecuted because it's hard to come up with actual evidence. So I hate to say that it's so hard to do this, but it's so important too, if you can. And I'm not saying everyone should, because as we've talked about, it's really hard to go to law enforcement and report this. And yes, it can be re-traumatizing, and very frequently it is, but there is a reason that it can be very important.
Yeah. Well, for instance, the one Mike was talking about, the podcast, she's had so many death threats that she has to be in a gated community now. And there's a podcast I listen to called Small Town Dicks, and they're retired cops, and they were sex abuse.
I have to laugh at the title.
I know it's inappropriate for our podcast, but at least one of them was in the sex crimes against children. And so, their whole purpose is they want to show that the cops that are really trying. And so whenever there's an episode, I just love their heart. You can tell, but this is what we run up against. And I work at a radio station in Seattle, and I just heard somebody, they had a prosecutor on, retired, and they were talking about the domestic violence. And he goes, here's the problem. You go and you start prosecuting, and then these women, they're usually women, recant. Well, here's the thing is, if they were to understand the purpose is because the woman's afraid she's going to be killed, the child's afraid his family's going to be killed, or worse, or the perpetrator they love is going to go to prison, or their parent is going to kill the perpetrator and their parent's going to go to prison. It's like those are the things. And if the police can begin to understand that and work with the victims in that way, recognizing the danger they're in, instead of just going, oh, you're just going to recant anyway. Well, it's bigger than that. But I do know that there is a lot of work. Laura Richards is doing a lot of work to pass laws about this. And so there are things happening, but I think our voices matter, and wherever we can speak up and be heard and be willing to be misunderstood, because we're gonna, right?
Right. So is there a better way? I think when you interviewed the law group, they talked about what they're trying to do to improve the process.
Yeah.
But how can law enforcement do it better? I know I've read some research that where they started different programs in different cities where, especially when it's a child, they will, like in Daniel's case, they'll have the testimony. It'll usually be video now that they will tape it privately, one interview, whoever, get all the questions out, get the whole story, put the questions out. So it's not, so it's with a non-threatening person asking all these questions, taking breaks if necessary, and then that document is then used as the testimony, so they don't have to re-traumatize it in a courtroom, trying to mince words. Oh, but you said this, and yeah, it was, you said it was Tuesday, it was really Wednesday, haha. And it's like, okay, all of that nonsense that lawyers do to win cases on minutia. Is there ways to do it better? So hopefully, instead of like Daniel's case, okay, we're going to storm the elementary school and take him out of class in front of everyone. Okay, yeah, let's arrange a time, have them come forward, so forth. Sign documentation. So if you change your mind later, okay, well, that's nice. This is evidence of when you told this story. It's going to be used no matter what, even if you change your mind later about telling the story, because that evidence needs to be there. How can we do it better? And then also for adults coming forward, so many adults coming forward in rape cases, sexual assaults, especially when they've happened maybe multiple years ago. I know for men, average 20 to 25 years first disclosure, sometimes because men don't have the language to realize, yeah, that icky thing that happened when I was a kid, that was abuse. I was groomed, to even understand that process.
Mike, those are such great questions. And Mike's a coach, and I love it that the question is. And so two things come to mind. One is, if you've had an experience recently, maybe you're younger or more recent than us, that's been encouraging, maybe there's some work being done and maybe we could talk about that. You could let us know. The second thing is, I used to work in the Columbia Tower in Seattle, which is 73 floors. And one day I'm looking down and we were right next to the courthouse and there's a sky bridge. And this woman is laying on top of the sky bridge. And pretty soon a helicopter comes. Pretty soon you see people. This went on all day long. You see people bringing a child. This woman had to face her abuser in court, and she got out the emergency exit and she was going to jump. That's how horrendous it is when we put people in these situations. And what we discovered later was the person who had abused her was his own lawyer. So he actually got to go and question her. So there is so much work to be done. And those are really great questions. And I don't know if we have the answers, but somebody might, that's listening, somebody might know what our next step is. But I think putting our voices out there, as hard as it is, and Kevin and I are always saying, tell your story, help the next person.
Right.
I think one of the ways we can address this is to just talk to law enforcement, talk to attorneys, talk to the people about your experiences, and maybe they could come up with better ways. I mean, in that woman's instance, allowing the perpetrator to defend himself, he did that probably intentionally so he could confront her and could make her.
And it was legal. It was legal.
And maybe there's ways of changing that so that that doesn't happen to the next person. I think one of the reasons I wanted to do this panel was to bring awareness to survivors of what they might be in store if they do go to law enforcement, but also what changes can happen. What can we do to make this better for the survivors? Because so much of the time, the survivors are looked at as not innocent, but a part of the issue. They're looked at as, well, what did you do to encourage this perpetrator? What did you do to make this happen to you? And, so many things that where the guilt is transferred to the victim rather than the perpetrator. And so I think until we address these issues, the change won't happen. But the only way to address them is to bring them up, to talk about them, to show what's happening and why it's so wrong. And so, Mike.
Right. Yeah. Another frustrating statistic is if you do decide to go to the police, how the laws are written in this country, the burden of proof is so very, very specifically defined. Out of all the abuse that happens, a very small percentage of people come forward. Now you're looking at that small percentage of people who actually tell police about what happened. Then out of all of those, a very, very small percent of those actually get to the DA's office to start our prosecution. Then out of all those that actually earn prosecution, a very, very small percent of those actually come up with a guilty plea. And out of all those, guilty plea, will they see jail time, minor fines? It's very, very small percentage. So it's out of an ocean of abuse cases, drop in the bucket of who actually goes to jail. So
and like you
is
said,
it
proof.
worth it?
Yeah.
Right.
There's not proof. They isolate you, get you alone. There's no witnesses, and that's what churches use. Well, do you have a witness? Well, of course not.
Right. Right. And yeah, it's,
That's such a
but I
good
think
point.
corroboration, definitely. So if it's more than one, they can help prosecute. But yeah, is it worth it? And so many people, yeah, it's not. It's not worth it. So they decide to not disclose to law enforcement and find other platforms to share their story.
Mm.
But in those instances, the perpetrator just gets off.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and as long as they know they can get off so easily, it's going to keep happening. And
Yeah.
Right.
And,
Right.
you know, like we can't name the person without a conviction. We have to say allegedly, but, you know, people are speaking out against their churches and their perpetrators. Daniel, I'm just really curious. I feel like your wheels are turning. You have that look. That
Everything's going through my mind. Oh, I was just one thing that I do remember during that initial interview at the high school when they came out there that I think needs to be mentioned. That is a positive. Well, I got a positive and negative there, which is the posture of the person doing the interviewing. And I'm talking about literal posture. The main detective, the main one who interviewed me, I remember like they had me in a chair. Okay. They sat me down and he kind of crouched down and, kind of off to the side, but near me on eye level. And I remember that disarming me. And it actually made it so much easier for me to actually give them the information that they were wanting because he positioned himself to me in a very vulnerable way himself. Like it was like eye to eye with me. I care about you type of thing. The other, one of the other main ones, I think it was the pastor at the time. He was kind of off to the other side of me, but he was kind of standing up, kind of leaning against the wall a little bit. I just remember his posture being completely more kind of towering in a way. And he wasn't as close to me as the detective was. The detective was the one asking me the questions. And so he did position himself positionally in a way that kind of invited answers from me because I didn't feel threatened by him. The questions felt threatening, but his presence wasn't threatening. And it made it so much easier for me to actually just give them the answers that they were wanting. One thing that I wish they had done, and I'm gonna throw this out there for you all. We're talking about the last abuser. That's how I refer to him. The last man who abused me, or the last abuser. There were others. Nobody asked me a question. Has anyone else done this to you? Has anyone else done similar things to you? I was giving them answers, okay? I was answering every question. It killed me to answer them, but I had enough conscience to know you better not lie. You just don't lie. Tell them the truth. And my faith helped me there too, right? Be truthful. What if they had said, has anyone else other than this man done similar things with you? They would have had a treasure trove of information on other people. And one of the other men that abused me was a family friend, and his abuse was sporadic over a period of years. He was actually turned into law enforcement by children. I mean, when I was in my early 40s or late 30s. So I had never reported him to police because I was still not understanding what happened to me. And what that interview process traumatized me so much, I was not going to go to them about anybody else.
Right.
I still didn't understand what had happened to me. By the time I realized this was abuse and all the cascading things came down on my mind and my heart, this other man, one of the other abusers in my life, was already convicted of doing this to other children much later, decades later. Okay. They could have had him in prison in the early 90s if they had asked me the question, has anybody else done this to you? Because I was giving them the information they wanted on the man that they were after. What if they had thought one step ahead? Because I was abused by multiple people in my life. Not just that man. And I'm not going to sit there and volunteer. Hey, you know what? Somebody else did this to me too. Do you want to know about that person? Like, I hated everything that was happening in that moment. And I blame myself for it. So I'm not going to sit there but if you had asked me when I was being truthful and giving you answers, if you had just gone a step farther, you would have unlocked the door on somebody else, and maybe more than that somebody else.
That is a mic drop moment.
Yeah.
And that would have been within statute of limitations. So by the time I'm decades later, the statute of limitations is out for anybody else that was an adult who abused me. You would have had a number of people that had already gone through the process and would have been out of the way. And the children that were victimized by this other man later, when I was an adult, would never have been victimized because he would have been in prison.
So
I've said on my podcast before, perpetrators, it's as if they can smell the victim on you, that you're an easy mark, just like a lion scanning for prey, finding the weak link and going after that. Predators know who's the easy mark. And so survivors of abuse, victims of abuse will get re-victimized by others because they will sense, even more so after it's already happened once, even more so because of whatever signals go off, they will, oh, that's an easy mark. And they will get re-victimized by others again and again. So many stories where it's rarely just a one-time thing that they will get re-victimized.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm wondering, Daniel, on you, if that other cop had sat down, even if he was away, instead of standing up, would that have even improved the process a little bit instead of having that?
Yes, because one of the things that I remember distinctly is the posture. Like whenever I go back to that moment in my mind, and by the way, just to let you all know, I have contacted both of those individuals now. One is actually the county sheriff now, the detective, and the pastor is a retired individual now who ran for mayor or whatever. So I actually reached out to both of them a number of years ago, said, thank you all. I didn't understand it then, but I'm so grateful that I know this was difficult for you and the case was horrible, but thank you all for what you did. Okay. So I come to that point in my life where I would freely talk to both of them. I'd like to get together with them now. But if they were both positionally in this equally vulnerable, I want to call it, where he's like crouching down or sitting down and leaning forward in a compassionate pose towards me. I distinctly remember my feeling toward him being a lot more trusting than the man that was standing up. That was the pastor. He was the pastor, the spiritual one in the room. He wasn't there as a pastor. He was there working for children's services, but he was the one that presented himself to me as the pastor when it was all said and done and gave me the scripture. Who do I remember the most as being the most compassionate? The detective who didn't give me a scripture, who didn't try to. I just remember the softness of his voice and his posture towards me. And it really did help me to be more open towards him. And my focus was on him, not towards the person that was kind of almost standing over here or anybody else that was in the room at the time.
That's kind of like the term we use of mirroring.
Yeah.
And that's how, I'm sure that perpetrators use it, but also it's a way that we can do. If they can't give us eye contact, then don't try to make eye contact. Posture yourself similar to them. And if they're making intense eye contact, you do that. But when I worked with homeless women, often they wouldn't look at us. So they'd be scrunched down against the wall. We'd scrunch down and look the other way. And all of a sudden they'd start talking. Posture is so important. This has been so amazing. And I think the questions you raised, Mike, I feel like we almost need to do a poll, maybe on our webpage, what people think and maybe through their experiences to get more information. And, foremost, now, Mike, it was recent for you, more recent than for me. Right. And so we do know that some things have changed, but I think this is a huge issue. And the more we can do to help the next person coming forward or being brought forward is only going to make it better, even if it is hard for us. Yeah. And, I always say this, I work with parents of people with addiction as well as addicted people and their parents. And I'm always saying, you're the parent. If you're the parent trying to get your kids back, you can't blame anyone. You have to take responsibility. You're the parent, you're the adult. And once we share our story and we start to get leverage and realize it wasn't us, then we can become better adults that can better help children.
I think one of the most important things maybe we could talk about is just how the system can change to assist survivors so they can come forward and they can tell their stories and they can get maybe assistance with what they're dealing with, but also just being able to be willing to go to law enforcement just so that possibly they can provide corroboration. I mean, it would be such a different world if more perpetrators were caught and arrested and, convicted. And so maybe they would think about it a little more. So what can we do to change the system that's happening? I mean, even as you were saying, Daniel, just the posture of the person interviewing the survivor, maybe not getting scripture that's going to make you feel like you were the one that was at fault. So many things that they can do to assist the survivor rather than make them be re-victimized.
And the follow-up, because he goes back to class, he has to walk to the school, he has to ride the bus, and then he gets home, and there's no cushion for you to walk into what you walked into. And so I think these issues are really huge, and I would love to explore them more, Kevin. That is such a good thing. And I think it comes from you, the people that have been through this in the recovery community that I work in. I'm not recovering from drugs and alcohol, but they all talk about lived experience. And sometimes I feel like I need to leave the room because they're so much more important than me because they have the lived experience. However, I've worked with them for so many years, but the people with the lived experience are going to give much better information.
Yeah, they need to consider environment too. I mean, they probably came to my school because they didn't want to approach it at home. I don't know. Home is kind of like a sacrosanct place. But the point of the matter is they take me to a little side conference room. And if you know anything about conference, they're just kind of sterile. It's like going into a police interview room. Have you ever watched police interviews and that you go into this bare room with a table and chairs? Now, maybe if you're interviewing the criminal, you want them to be uncomfortable. But if you're interviewing somebody who's been victimized, you want them to be, relaxed and comfortable so they can, and not on edge. And when you're in a room where there's nothing around you, and Lori, I'm looking at the background, it's homey there for you. But I'm just saying, you're on a folding chair, you're in front of a tape recorder, sitting in front of a table in front of you. And it's like, there's nothing in the environment that invited disclosure. Okay. And a lot of times law enforcement resorts to a very sterile type of environment when they're interviewing things or people, when they're bringing them in for questioning or whatever. Maybe it makes sense for the criminal, but I don't know that it makes sense for somebody who's been victimized to sit there being like threatened by you're into the four walls,
Yeah, that's really
I think if they would make the experience so much less re-traumatizing, whether it's a child victim or an adult victim or an adult victim of something that happened in childhood, that they need to make it as less re-traumatizing as possible so that more people would be willing to come forward, because so many horror stories, I hear them all the time, of re-traumatizing experience, just trying to do the right thing, go to the police, even though realizing the chances of prosecution and jail time is very, 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 very small, though go report. So there's corroboration. So they have the information. That's important.
Yeah.
So then they have it documented. And then
I feel like for children, they're doing a lot of work. I feel like they're, like you mentioned, Mike, they're having, counselors and having them only do it one time. But I feel like there's still a lot missing for the survivor that comes forward after the 25 years. And, if we could find, I think that maybe be the gap where we can just be like, because the more of us that are able to be free, tell our story, get freedom from the suppression of this thing that happened to us, then we will be able to help recognize and help the children because we've gotten, because like one of you said, that's what happens to children. And I know in my situation, the adults were like, well, that's what happens because it happened to them. And so we pass that down. So if we can get help, get freedom, share our story, we've got the counselor going, oh, by the way, did you know that's not your fault? All the things that can happen when we're believed, when we can finally begin to share a story. I think of Mike sharing his story, and then it opened the door for more things that came out, and now he's doing this work. Like sometimes it's layers of stories. And like Daniel said, had they asked about had it happened before, how many children could have been saved. And so I think that's the weight of what we're doing here is this is how we help the children.
Yeah.
This is how we make it better.
Yeah, I think that's my big emphasis on this is this can lead to prevention. This could lead to, at least maybe saving someone in the future, saving the child in the future. But I think it's important if you are a survivor to be prepared that it's not easy to report, that you may feel re-victimized. They might not believe you. They might want to, find ways of blaming you, or there's so many things that can go wrong. But I think it's important to be aware that it's important to be in the space where you're prepared that this is not going to be easy,
and maybe have support,
and
have someone go with you,
have support. And so, but it is important if we can do anything to prevent anyone else being victimized.
I didn't mention this, but of course, a small town. So my counselor, I couldn't afford counseling. I was a young mom and we were just strapped, and she invited me to go to Crime Victim Compensation, which is a great organization, and they will help with counseling. I walk in, the front desk is someone from my church that I knew so well. And now I got to do this again. So Kevin, that's so valid. And, it's like, I don't think we can ever be prepared, but we can know that it might be difficult and bring in the reinforcements and then plan afterwards to see your counselor, to be with a friend, to, like Daniel said, sometimes being vulnerable will wreck you for days. Do you not want to be vulnerable? No, we'll be wrecked for days, but let's find the support and the self-care we need to keep us going, to keep us helping, because too many children are being abused and trafficked, and it's got to stop.
Yes.
Absolutely.
That's a good place for us to stop for prayer. And I just feel like that's where it is. It's, the outrages that children are being.
Well, thank you guys both so much for sharing your stories of vulnerability and the pain and trauma that you were re-experiencing. But I think it's important that we prepare and are aware of what it's like. So thank you.
Yeah, we're so honored to have you on, and thank you for coming.
Absolutely.
Yes, thank you.
So we'll have Kevin start, and if either one of you want to pray, just jump right in.
So that's it for today.
We are going to have a prayer time if you want to stick with us. If not, we believe in you.
We want to hear from you. We want to hear your stories.
If you like this podcast, please rate and review, because that's how other people can find us. And we really want to spread this message.
Father, I thank you for all your blessings, and that even in our hardships, we can reach others and help them and make life easier for them and better for them and protect them. And Lord, I just pray for your presence with anyone who's listening, and that you are there to protect them and comfort them with your presence. And Lord, I just pray for that things will change. Pray that through awareness, through talking about this, through bringing more people to prosecution, that things are going to change for the survivors, that things will get easier to talk about this. And Lord, I just pray that every little step we take will bring us closer to helping others. In your name I pray.
Father, thank you for this podcast, for this technology where we can share stories and reach others. Father, thank you for Kevin and Lori for their leadership here. Thank you for Daniel for sharing his story as well. And Father, just so many victims, survivors, so many hurting people out there. Father, I just pray that you would continue to protect them and help each one find healing, Father, and pray that you would inspire us and others to do what is needed to stem the tide, to fight all of this evil in this world that would go against young children and adults with all this sexual violence, Father, and what the best way is to counteract that, Lord. Just give us the wisdom and the power to help that, Lord, so we can change things and make this a safe world for all of us.
Father, I pray for us, the survivors. I thank you that we can be vulnerable, we can get support, but most of all, as Michael said, I just pray that whatever's on our heart, whatever you're prompting us to do, that we will just say yes, whether it's saving the world, going on a podcast, or reaching out to a neighbor, or telling our story, whatever it is, you prompt us, and that we just say yes. And and we be brave, because we've already been so brave. And this level of bravery is different. And this level of bravery is going to have an impact on our world, whether it's 1-on-1 or 1-to-1,000,000, whatever it is, Father. I just pray that you will prompt us and show us the pathway, show us where we can make a difference, even in our own communities. I thank you that you love us and that we are not damaged goods. As Mike said, it's so easy for us to feel as though we're broken. And Lord, we are not. We are whole in you, and we thank you for that. We thank you for the freedom that past no longer has a hold on us. In your Son's holy name, amen.
Amen.